Let's start with the Codex Alimentarius Commission, and actually the need for standard that can be applied globally is increasing time to time, and especially this is related with the development of the international relation, specifically with the increasing trade between countries. History has recorded that the emergence of international standard first occurred in 1903 when the International Dairy Federation, IDF, developed international standard for milk and dairy products. This IDF effort has actually become one of the main trigger or accelerator for the birth of an institution called the Codex Alimentarius Commission. And finally, 60 years later, in 1963, the Codex Alimentarius Commission was officially established as a joint FAO-WHO Food Standard Program, and held its first formal meeting or formal session in Rome, Italy, from June 25th to July 3rd, 1963. So the year of 1963 was a very historic one for Codex, and for this reason, 1963 has been recognized as the official birth of the CAC. Since then, since the establishment, the Codex Alimentarius Commission has continued to work on developing international standard until now. And in 1995, we know that a WTO, World Trade Organization, was established, and the main objective of the WTO is trying to facilitate fair practices in the international trade, at which member of the WTO agrees to implement three main principles, namely minimizing trade barrier, establishing scheme or mechanism of negotiation, and also upholding the principle of non-discrimination. Okay. The establishment of WTO, in my opinion, has increased the strategic meaning or the strategic importance of the Codex standard itself. Why? This is because due to the specific agreement at the WTO, namely SPS agreement, sanitary and phytosanitary measures agreement, and the essence of the SPS agreement is basically three things. One is about food safety, regulation about food safety, animal health, and also regulation on plant health. And it was agreed by member of the WTO that SPS measure should be applied only to the extent necessary to protect human, animal, and plant life or health. Meaning that the government should not develop regulations specifically designed to add barrier to trade, to protect the domestic product, for example. So the main objective of any regulation, according to the SPS agreement, should be related to protection of human, animal, or plant life or health. So this is the basic or the essence of SPS agreement. Furthermore, member of WTO also agreed to recognize three international setting organization agencies to establish international standard related on animal health. This is established by OIE. OIE is the Office of International Epizootise, OIE, or the World Organization for Animal Health. And then standard related to plant health established by the IPPC, the International Plant Protection Convention. And standard related to human health, especially related to food safety and quality, established by Codex Alimentarius Commission, or CAC. These three organizations, OIE, IPPC, and CAC, is usually considered as or referred as the three sister organizations of the international standard. If you want to study more about this in more detail, you can go to the website that I stated here. Okay. So back to the Codex, as I mentioned before, Codex has grown into truly global organization. Currently, as of today, February 2022, Codex has a member of 189 members and 243 Codex observers. Among those 243 observers, 60 are IGO, International Organization, and 167 is NGOs, and 16 observers coming from United Nations Organization. So as you can see, Codex has really a global membership, reaching all continents of the world, representing about 99% of the world population. Membership of Codex is grouped into 5 regional, namely regional Asia. Here, let me show you. This is regional Asia, meaning that as an official, for example, member country from Asia is grouped into one, which is CC Asia. Indonesia, in this case, is belong to the CC Asia as well. Okay. Other than Asia, other regional also, we have regional Africa here, and then this is regional Near East, and this is regional European, and then this is a CC leg, Latin America and Caribbean regional. And then we have also Southwest Pacific and North America. So we have 2 here from Southwest Pacific and 2 from, 12 here from Southwest Pacific and 2 from North America. Okay. So the objective of Codex, actually, the main objective of Codex, or the main work of Codex, is actually to develop international standard. We'll discuss further that when we're talking about standard, it also includes guideline and also code of practice and other recommendations actually coming from a Codex, with specifically here the intention of doing the international standard is to protect the health of consumers and to ensure fair practices in the food trade. So those are 2 important mandate of Codex, and sometimes people call it dual mandate of Codex, protecting the health of consumer and ensuring fair practices in the food trade. So in terms of the output, obviously the Codex output is standard itself. Okay. Standard is a document containing provision regarding specific quantitative and or qualitative requirement for a product or group of products. Okay. As of now, February 2022, Codex has developed 232 standard. Next is guideline. So guideline is document containing provision on how specific objective might be achieved. These documents mainly are intended for government to be used as a guideline in developing their national food system, including to empower, for example, the national food industry. Currently, Codex has developed 79 guidelines. So the third one is code of practices. Code of practice is basically a document containing requirement on how to achieve uniform compliance with the legislation. So primarily, code of practice is aimed at the government, used by the government to supervise or to fostering the industry, for example, and also used by industry itself to ensure the good production process are in order to ensure that the production system will achieve the goal of the Codex, which is food safety. So code of practice can also be thought as a checklist of requirement for government to check and also for industry to comply. Currently, Codex has 55 code of practice that has been developed. Other than that, Codex also developed many other texts. For example, the more important one is related to maximum residual level of veterinary drug, MRLs for pesticide, and also maximum level of use of food additive, for example, and many, many more. Here is a list of the things as an output of Codex. All of those things are usually referred as a Codex text. Okay, and not only that, Codex established standard code of practice, guideline, maximum residual level, and also maximum use of food additive, for example, but also some of the document in more general term. For example, here, statement on infant feeding. This is important document of Codex, and also document regarding the classification of food and animal feed, and also glossary of term and definition regarding the residue of fat trap in food, and also list of Codex specification of food additive. So all of those things again is called as a Codex text. Okay. Codex are not mandatory, which means that the member country of Codex have no obligation to adopt the standard Codex into their national standard, unless the country itself deems it is necessary for them to adopt it as a national standard. Okay, but it is not mandatory. So in principle, Codex standards are related texts are not a substitute for or alternative to national legislation. Okay? So every member country of Codex has their own sovereignty in this case, meaning that every country's law and administrative procedure containing a provision with which it is essential for everybody doing business in that country has to comply with. So not directly with Codex. Again, unless the country itself decided to adopt the Codex text. However, this is a very important note. As I previously indicated, that Codex standard has been specifically referred to and by WTO in dispute settlement case. That is, Codex standard will be used for resolving trade dispute between two or more WTO member countries. Okay. So in principle, WTO SPS agreement actually encourages government to establish national standard, national SPS measures, for example, consistent with Codex text, including standard, guideline, code of practice, and other recommendations coming from Codex. Okay. This process is usually referred to as harmonization. So the member countries are encouraged to harmonize their national regulation with the international standard. However, specifically, also it was mentioned that the WTO member that wish to apply stricter food safety measure can do so actually, but they may be required to justify why their national requirement, national standard are stricter as compared to those set by Codex scientifically. Okay, so this kind of justification is usually called as a scientific justification. Okay. So I think it's also very important to note that WTO does not distinguish the status, it does not differentiate the status between the various Codex texts, whether it is standard, whether it is a guideline or code of practice, all are considered as standard by the definition of standard established by WTO. Okay. So why are Codex standards considered as a reference standard for the WTO? There are many reasons for that. One of the important reasons is that Codex standards are developed using risk analysis principle. So this is the main good reason actually, because WTO would like to use a standard and regulation based on risk analysis principle, and Codex has done so for so many years. Yeah. So in principle, when Codex applied or using approach of risk analysis principle, meaning that the standards are one, developed based on science, consistent and open and transparent manner, and then the process is fully and systematically documented, again in transparent manner, and in implementing risk analysis principle, Codex has a clear functional separation between risk assessment work and also risk management work. And especially at the Codex setting, international setting, Codex also always consider the situation and special need of the developing countries. Okay, so this is important for the global trade because many times special needs are identified coming from the developing country, especially related to the capacity. Okay. So in general, as a framework, risk analysis consists of three main components, namely risk assessment, risk management, and risk communication. So the first, I would like to say something about risk assessment. So at Codex, risk assessment is done by expert panel established by FAO and WHO. This expert panel will do the risk assessment based on sound scientific basis and evidence. Okay? And then the result of the risk assessment will be given to a risk manager, which is the Codex Alignment Risk Commission in this case, in the form of scientific advice and scientific information analysis. Okay. So the second component is risk management. Okay. At the global level, the risk management organization or risk manager is actually the CAC, the Codex Alignment Risk Commission itself and its member, obviously. And this CAC will develop regulation and control measures here, okay, in the form of establishing standard, again, guideline, code of practice, and other Codex texts. Okay. And the third important component of risk analysis is risk communication. Basically, all the information regarding the proposal, draft, discussion that occurring in Codex during the development of standard should be communicated transparently to all stakeholders through an effective dialogue. In principle, here, risk assessment is carried out to provide an estimate of the magnitude of the likelihood and also the severity of the hazard or disease caused by a particular hazard in food. So this is the main activity of the risk assessment. And this usually done employing a four-step method. Namely, one is hazard identification. Yeah. This is to answer the question of what hazard that might causing harm to human or to a specific segment of the population. This is the first one. The second one is hazard characterization. trying to answer question about who may be exposed to the hazard and what is the level, the hazard characterization here, which will analyze and seek information about what effect or harm will be caused by the presence of hazard. Okay, and then the third one is exposure assessment, which try to answer question about who may be exposed to the hazard and what is the level of exposure for the one who are exposed for this particular segment of the population, for example. Okay, after knowing the hazard characterization and also exposure, then the risk assessor, the risk assessment body, will do risk characterization, trying to answer the question of whether the presence of hazard will harm or injure the population. If so, how likely it is? Is it very likely, maybe medium possibility, or even low probability? Okay. So preferably, if the risk assessment body can suggest the probability in more quantitative way. But basically, risk characterization is trying to characterize the risk, whether the likelihood of harm to the population is very likely, medium possibility, or low probability. Okay. That's a lot of work to do in terms of the assessment. And at international level, risk assessment is done by expert panel established by FAO and WHO. One of such panel are JECFA, Joint FAO WHO Expert Committee on Food Additive. Initially, JECFA is established to evaluate the safety of food additives, but now the work of JECFA also includes assessing risk of contaminants, natural occurring toxicant, and also residues of fat drug in food. In general, JECFA will elaborate principles for evaluating their safety, the safety associated with the presence of specific hazard, conduct toxicological evaluation, and establish what we call as ADI, acceptable daily intake, or tolerable intakes, and also prepare a specification of purity for food additive and assess the intake or the exposure. So those are scope of work of JECFA. And also JECFA related with veterinary drug will do the same thing, resulting in the establishment of acceptable daily intake also, and also recommend the maximum residual limit for specific fat drug. The next is expert panel for the risk assessment related to pesticide residue, which is GMPR, joint meeting of FAO WHO on pesticide residue. So the main output for this GMPR are estimation of the ADI, acceptable daily intake, and also proposal for the maximum residual limit for individual pesticide in or on specific commodities. The next is JEMRA, Joint Expert Meeting on Microbiological Risk Assessment, and then we also have JEMNU, Joint FAO WHO Expert Meeting on Nutrition for risk associated with nutrition. And lastly, here, Codex or FAO and WHO in this case may also establish ad hoc expert consultation for specific emerging issues, for example, if needed. Okay. So, for example, here Codex at one point has developed a panel of experts in the field of nanotechnology in the agro-food sector, for example. So they established ad hoc expert committee or expert consultation on nanotechnology in agri-food sector. So how the risk analysis approach was done in Codex will be illustrated as the following. So in principle, again, CAC, Codex Alimentary Commission, is a risk manager, risk management body at international level. Okay. So in doing the work here, developing standard, if needed, Codex will request for scientific advice to risk assessor. In other words, Codex will request to the expert panel here for risk assessment on particular issues related to food safety. Okay, this is associated with the work currently being done in Codex. So depending upon the risk, the expert panel responsible to provide scientific advice can be JECFA if it is related to food additive, fat drug, residue, and also contaminant in food. It might be GMPR associated with pesticide, GEMRA, GEMNU, or probably ad hoc expert consultation if it is related with specific emerging issues. Okay, so after the risk assessment is done by international risk assessment body, by expert panel established by FAO and WHO, the risk assessment body, JECFA, GMPR, GEMRA, GEMNU, will report. So the expert panel will publish a scientific report, scientific advice given to public actually, but more specifically by Codex, and the Codex will use the advice as a basis for developing standard. And during all of this activity, the risk communication, that is the dialogue with all stakeholders, need to be done as well. So that's a general idea as how the risk analysis approach was implemented at the Codex work. Like all other aspects of commission work, the procedure for preparing standard are well defined at the Codex procedural manual. This is a book that was established to explain all of the work related to Codex, the mechanism, and also the work procedure, so that everything has to be open and transparent to all of the stakeholders here. And usually the procedure of Codex in developing standard is called as the 8-step process. Okay. So this is the normal 8-step process that I was talking about. So this is the normal procedure in developing standard at Codex. As you can see, the process is quite long here. The process is initiated by member country or maybe committee, so you can read here in more detail, by submitting a proposal. So usually in the form of discussion paper outlining what the proposed standard is expected to achieve. Okay, what is the main objective? And then there is a lot of discussion here, and finally the result of the discussion will be outlined here in the form of project document, including not only about what is the intended work would like to achieve, but also the project proposal, the project document will indicate the time frame for the work and their priority as well, related to or relative to the strategic objective of Codex. Okay, and then the project document and also including the discussion paper will be submitted to the commission. Okay, over here at the commission. Okay, if the commission finally agreed with the proposal and decided to start work, And the process of developing Codex standard is just started, basically. But again, only if they agree. If they don't agree, so they will send the project document and discussion paper back again to be revised, probably, or also to be resubmitted in the future. But if they decided to accept the proposal, then we can say that the step procedure for Codex is already at the step number 1. So this is step number 1. The commission approved new work based on the project document and the recommendation of the executive committee. Okay, so the executive committee, I will talk about that later on. Okay, so after that, the elaboration of the standard are started, basically. So we have now start with the elaboration. Number 1 here, step number 2 now is preparation of the draft, and then step number 3 is the consultation, circulation of the draft to all of the members, and then step number 4, revising the draft after collecting the input from here, and then going to step number 5, which is again elaboration at the meeting, okay, the complete meeting involving all of the members. Okay. At one point, at certain cases, sometimes the Codex standard at this stage is considered enough or considered good enough to be finalized. But if it is not, then you can go to the step number 6, trying to revise again, and then step number 7, trying to collect all of the input, and then again revise the standard, and finally discussion on whether or not the draft is already good enough, ready for adoption or not. And this is step number 8. Okay, as I mentioned before, sometime at this step, step number 5, the draft is considered to be good enough. So if that's the case, then the draft will skip step number 6 and step number 7 and directly go to step 8, and they call that as a step 5/8. Okay, this is sometime occurring if the discussion at this stage is progressing very well, so that the draft resulting from step 2, 3, and 4 is in a very good form. Okay. So that's very much the 8 step or the step procedure of developing standard at Codex. And in terms of the organization, Codex Alimentaries Commission here is consisting a lot of subsidiary body. Number 1 here is, so this is the commission itself. The commission is the body responsible for all matters regarding the implementation of the joint FAO-WHO food standard program here. And then Codex have executive committee. So this is that will provide, recommendation for the commission, comprised of chair and then 3 vice chair and 6 regional coordinator here: Asia, Africa, Near East, Latin America and Caribbean, Europe, and then Southwest Pacific and North America, and 7 elected representatives from various geographical group of Codex. So these are executive committee. And then we have horizontal or general committee. General subject committee is a committee who develop a general standard, guideline, and code of practice, which are applied transversely or horizontally to all product and product category. Okay. This text usually deal with hygienic practice, labeling, additive, inspection, and certification, and so on. So we have 10 general subject committee here. And then we have a committee on commodity standard. Currently we have 4. This is on fish and fishery product. This is fresh fruit, and vegetable, and this is fat and oil, and this is spices and culinary herb. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. In addition to that, Codex may also establish ad hoc international intergovernmental task force. Currently, Codex does not have any task force. The recent one is on TFAMR. This is ad hoc Codex Intergovernmental Task Force on Antimicrobial Resistance. Just finished their work, and consequently, the task force, after finishing their work, will dissolve, will abolish. This is in 2021. So again, as I mentioned before, in addition to that, Codex has a regional coordinating committee, or an official name is FAO-WHO Regional Committee, which is Asia, Africa, Near East, Latin America, and Caribbean, European, and Southwest Pacific and North America. Okay, so this is just a list of the active committee currently in Codex. This is contaminant in food, food additive, and so on. You may read this on yourself later on. And this is the 6th regional committee and recent task force. Again, this is actually this is not active. This is just abolished or just dissolved last year. Okay. The last thing that I would like to mention here is that in developing Codex standard, commodity committee must collaborate or coordinate with the general subject committee, so that finally the general subject committee will endorse the specific provision, specifically the provision related to the general subject. Okay. I will say a little bit more about that. To illustrate this, this collaboration, so we need a link, to see a link between the general subject committee and the commodity committee in this case. So we will illustrate how the commodity committee, in this case, the Codex Committee of Fresh Fruit and Vegetable, CCFFV, which is up now in February 2021, is still active and has successfully established about 42 standards of fresh fruit and vegetable. So as you can see here, the list is very long. Standard for asparagus, for example, avocado, and many more. Again, total CCFFV has already established 42 standards. The basic format of the community standard is as follows. So start with scope, definition, description, essential composition and quality factor, and so on. Food additive, contaminant, agrochemical, hygiene, weigh and measures, labeling, and methods of analysis and sampling. So this is the general or basic format of the Codex commodity standard. However, specific provision regarding here, regarding scope, definition, and everything associated with the commodity standard is discussed deeply at the CCCF, at the commodity committee. But specific provision regarding, for example, here, food additive, okay, food additive has to be developed in such a way that the standard of commodity standard will, in alignment, will be harmonized with the general standard of food additive. Okay, so with that, this provision need to be consulted and coordinated and finally endorsed by CCFA, Codex Committee on Food Additive. The same thing can be said, for example, provision on contaminant related to Codex Commodity Standard is also need to be consulted, coordinated, and also finally endorsed by CCFV. CF. This is on contaminant. The same thing again can be said on pesticide or pesticide residue, hygiene with the CCFH, food hygiene, labeling with CCFL, or definition on food labeling, and method of analysis and sampling with CCMS. So this clearly indicate that to ensure a better alignment among the standard developed by Codex, consultation and coordination with, and finally endorsed by general subject need to be done. Okay.